To St. Gregory the Great. See a lot of familiar faces, as I always do. I'd like to start off this evening, as we should start everything, with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
O God, our Creator, from your provident hand we have received our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have called us as your people and given us the right and the duty to worship you, the only true God, and your Son, Jesus Christ. Through the power and working of your Holy Spirit, you call us to live out our faith in the midst of the world, bringing the light and the saving truth of the gospel to every corner of society. We ask you to bless us in our vigilance for the gift of religious liberty. Give us the strength of mind and heart to readily defend our freedoms when they are threatened. Give us courage in making our voices heard on behalf of the rights of your church and the freedom of conscience of all people of faith. Grant, we pray, O Heavenly Father, a clear and united voice to all your sons and daughters gathered in your church in this decisive hour in the history of our nation, so that with every trial withstood and every danger overcome, for the sake of our children, our grandchildren, and all who come after us, this great land will always be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Again, welcome. I noticed that there are some interesting beverages over there at the table. Seems to be, this has become a wine and cheese party, so that's something to look forward to. We also have some announcements I'd like to make before we get started this evening. We do have some programs coming up for the Effect team. The first one is actually starting this Thursday, and you still have time to sign up because it doesn't cost anything. You just go online and sign up for the program through the Wild Goose production, My Father's Father, which is with Father Dave Levanka. I'm sure all of you have seen some of Father Dave Levanka's work. The guy does an exceptional job. I don't know, he's one of those guys that he just says good morning to you, and I feel like, wow, I've just learned something. He's amazing. So this program, though, I've watched it through. It's really incredible. It runs for 6 episodes. And we will be showing all 6 starting this Thursday. There's an AM and a PM session. Information is in the bulletin, it's online. Like I said, you can sign up there and it is free, there is no charge. And it's all about God as our Father. And, you know, we sometimes forget, we think about Christ, we forget that we also have a Heavenly Father, someone who looks at each and every one of us as his sons and daughters. And the purpose of this is not only to get you to understand your relationship with God, the Father, but also our relationship, if we are fathers, if we have a father, if we know fathers. You know, so this is something that everyone can really learn a lot from. I say it all the time. You know, I run a men's group here that manages you on Saturday mornings, and the reason we have that is because it's so important that we have strong Catholic men to lead, and strong Catholic women as well. But so often the men kind of take a back seat. They don't go to church as often. They're not as involved in the prayer life of their kids, and that has to change. You have to get involved with your kids, with your grandkids. It's great taking them to soccer practice on Sundays and things like that, but it's a little bit more important to get them to church and to pray with them. So again, that's starting this Thursday, runs for 6 weeks. Phenomenal program with Father Dave Levanka. There's also something coming up on May 15th. It's a Wednesday. It's part of our Eucharistic Revival programs here, and we have a special guest speaker, which some of you may know a little bit about, you may be familiar with. It's Monsignor Richard LaBrigetta. I didn't know he became a Monsignor. When did he get promoted? Recently? Okay. So you all know Father LaBrigetta from his time here. So he will be with us on May 15th at 7 p.m. in the church, and the title of his talk will be Living the Eucharist. And there's one other item coming up. It's the Eucharistic pilgrimage that from the 4 corners of the U.S. to the Eucharistic Convention in Indianapolis. It runs mid-May through mid-July. The northeast route of this Eucharistic procession, which is going to take place, called the Seton route, comes through Trenton and Bordentown the last days of May. So if you'd like to be a part of that, you're certainly welcome to do so. And you can find more information about that if you just Google 2024 Eucharistic Pilgrimage. So there you go, a lot going on, as always. So that brings us to our keynote speaker tonight. I don't know if do you call them a keynote speaker if they're the only speaker? I don't know how that works. Anyway, our speaker tonight is Dr. R.J. Snell. Dr. Snell is the director of the academic programs at the Witherspoon Institute. He is also the executive director of the Aquinas Institute, which is the Roman Catholic chaplaincy of Princeton University. Prior to his appointment at the center, he was for many years a professor of philosophy at Eastern University and the Templeton Honors College. His research interests include the liberal arts, ethics, natural law theory, Thomas Aquinas, the Catholic intellectual tradition, and the work of Bernard Lonergan, S.J. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. Snell.
Thank you. I am very grateful to St. Greg's and to the Adult Education Committee here, and especially to Kathy, who's been very patient with me for, 2 years now. I had to cancel last year because of some health problems, and so I was glad to be invited back basically on the same subject. Although, as I'm sure Kathy can attest, I'm not always the best at responding to emails, and she would occasionally sort of check in, are you still alive? And the health problems really gotten the best of you or not. But really grateful to her and to all of you. So I'm sure we're talking about religious freedom tonight. I'm sure you're well aware of these words. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's just the words of the First Amendment, or words of the First Amendment. And when it comes to religious freedom, I want to suggest, just to unjustly paraphrase Charles Dickens, that it's the best of times and it's the worst of times when it comes to religious freedom. It's the best of times in some ways because the Supreme Court over recent decades really has been protecting religious freedom. But when it comes to the culture at large, we face some pretty significant challenges, not only from lower courts and from local state agencies and so on, but indeed from the culture at large. So I want to tell both a good story and a story of challenge. And I want to do so by breaking up the First Amendment into what's often called the Establishment Clause and then the Free Exercise Clause. Now, if you're a strict grammarian, you would already protest. Because if you look at the First Amendment, there are not two clauses about religion. There is grammatically only one clause. But the way that the Supreme Court has developed the jurisprudence through the years is to think of the questions of establishment. This is generally when we think of the separation of church and state, or the wall of separation of church and state, or how involved can the state be in religion? That's the establishment part. The court has thought of that as being different from the free exercise aspect of religion, which is about what you can do as a private individual, where you can do that, when you might be exempt from a law which is otherwise general and neutral. So I'm going to follow both of those out, telling the story of a few Supreme Court cases and some positive developments in recent years from the court in part 1 and 2. And then in the third part, I want to think about some, what I take to be significant challenges facing us on a social and cultural level. And the court can protect us, but the court can't do everything. And of course, the composition of the court can change. Justice Scalia used to remind people, there's no reason to think that when it comes to the court, the arc of the universe bends only towards justice. It might bend towards justice and it might bend towards injustice, you're not sure. And so if we place too much confidence in the court, which at the moment has been pretty good on religion, it might not always be good, and we need to think long and hard about social and cultural issues as well. So let's start with establishment, and maybe some things that are good developments. Some of you may know or have read about the case of the famous landmark Supreme Court case, Everson. Everson happened not too far from here in Ewing. It's a court case in 1947 about establishment and whether or not the township of Ewing could provide school buses to children who attended parochial school. And it turned out on a 5-4 vote, the township of Ewing was in fact allowed by the Supreme Court to provide busing for children who were going to Roman Catholic parochial school. Now, on the one hand, the argument was that this fairly clearly violated the Establishment Clause because the state, or in this instance the township, was providing not just buses but funding to get children to religious education. The response, of course, was no religious education is occurring on the bus. They're not doing catechesis on the bus. I'm not sure what happened in Catholic school buses in 1947, but I imagine it's just like today. Not a whole lot of catechesis is happening on the bus. My wife likes to tell a story. We're both converts to Catholicism, of being on the bus, and a local Catholic boy asked her to the prom. And she said, "I'm sorry, I only date Christians." And he said, "Yeah, I'm Catholic." And she said, "I know." The question is it an entanglement of the government to provide busing to a school? What if the school is religious? That's the question of establishment. Now, the court decided on a 5-4 vote that that was okay. They could provide busing to school. But here's what's to notice. All 9 justices agreed on the following theory of establishment. They just merely disagreed about the facts. And here's the theory that governed all 9 of the justices in 1947. It's a theory which is called strict separationism. Strict separationism. And that governed most of the Supreme Court understanding through about the mid-1980s. Strict separationism made the following claims. First, the government could have no view about what religion was at all. Couldn't define religion, right? Couldn't define religion versus a sect or a cult. Couldn't define a true religious belief from a false religious belief. Couldn't say that this was a reasonable religion or an unreasonable religion. The state had no opinion about the nature, content, and truth of religion. That's 1. 2, the state had to be non-preferential between religions. So if there was going to be busing for the Catholic parochial school, there would have to be busing for the Jewish day school. If there was going to be busing for the Jewish day school, there had to be busing for the Islamic day school, that sort of thing. If you're going to give an advantage to a Buddhist, you had to give advantage to a Catholic and to a Protestant and so on. But then, third, and interestingly, strict separationism insisted that the state not only could not have preferential treatment between or among the various religions, Catholicism, the Methodist Church, the Presbyterians, and so on, but the state could not give any preference or advantage to religion itself as opposed to non-religion. The secular state and the religious group had to be treated identically. So note the withdrawal or the stepping back. Not only was there a sense of fairness between and among religious groups, but religion is now, in a sense, on a back foot, because religion is not able to make the claim that it is a social good like secular goods, and religion can't be preferred in any way whatsoever. And that's strict separationism. Strict separationism lasts through about the 80s. It was governed in many ways by the so-called Lemon Test, which was operative especially from 1971. The Lemon Test said that whenever the state got involved with religion, there were 3 prongs of a test that had to be met. First, whatever the legislation was, it had to have secular intent. So go back to the school bus case, which happened before Lemon, but you can see how it works. What's the point of providing busing? It's to get kids to school. That's a secular intent, yes? It's not to get kids to Catholic school. It's not to give the kids catechesis. It's merely to get them to school, which is a secular good, so that's fine. Second, according to the Lemon Test, you can neither increase nor decrease religion. You couldn't prefer religion or not prefer religion. It had to be neutral and general. And then third, it couldn't result, the state action, couldn't result in excessive entanglement with religion. Of course, nobody knew what that meant. But not long after the Everson case, another case very similarly came up, which was not now whether you could provide busing to a parochial school, which the court said was okay, but whether the school district could provide geology textbooks to a parochial school. Now, the geology textbooks were just ordinary geology textbooks. They made no reference to God, they made no reference to Genesis, they made no reference to the glories of creation. And that, however, was not constitutional, because that's an excessive entanglement with religion, because where are the books stored? In a classroom at a parochial school, and maybe there's nuns and priests around, okay? That's an excessive entanglement. Now, strict separationism, in some sense, goes away in the mid-80s, and a new theory emerges. And note the slight, but nonetheless important difference, which is non-preferentialism. Now the theory includes some of strict separationism, namely, any action that the state does or a state agent, township, locale, governor, whatever, whatever they do has to be non-preferential between and among religions. If you were to provide something for St. Greg's, you have to provide something for the bridge, which is down the street, which I don't know what that is, but I'm assuming it's not part of St. Greg's, right? It's a different kind of religious organization. Whatever you do for a Jewish day school or a synagogue, you'd have to do for a Catholic school or a Catholic church and so on. But note this change. Under the new theory of the 80s, you could, according to the Supreme Court, prefer or do actions which benefited religion as opposed to non-religion. So under strict separationism, you had to treat religion and non-religion as precisely the same. Beginning in the 80s, the account was, lo and behold, it turns out religion might be okay. Religion might have some social value. It might be good for citizens to be religious. And in fact, it's deeply within the American story. Here's the language from the court. It's within the history, tradition, and mores of the people, in this case, the people of the United States, to think that religion is okay. And that the state, while it couldn't coerce or compel religion, could encourage religion. Think about something as simple as churches having charitable status or nonprofit status. There's a sense in which that works to the benefit of religion, yes? Not every institution has nonprofit status. There are those who wish to take that away from religious organizations. But there is a sense in which it's good for the world, it's good for the community, it's good for the town if churches have a kind of status. Note the small change. Now we didn't have to treat religion and non-religion as fundamentally equal. Religion could be preferred or encouraged by the state. That's a pretty significant difference. Things aren't so great though. In 1992, we have a famous case, Lee v. Weissman. Anybody remember this case? It's about school prayer, or about prayer in graduations. So it's a school which every year has a graduation ceremony, as many schools do. And at every one of these graduations, some member of the clergy is invited to give an incredibly generic prayer of civil religion. One year, a rabbi comes in and does a prayer. The next year, the Methodist minister comes in and does the prayer. The next year, the Catholic priest comes in and does the prayer. The year after that, the Presbyterian minister. So no, it changes, yes? And the prayer cannot be sectarian or confessional. The prayer was not allowed to begin with the sign of the cross, for instance. The prayer was not allowed to make reference to Jesus Christ. It could refer to things like God or Creator or Master of the universe. Very generic, yes? Now, this is struck down as unconstitutional. The court declines to protect school prayer at graduation. Now, why? The argument given, and you can see how dangerous this argument is that students at school, when they are asked to observe a moment of silence or to stand out of respect for other people's prayer, are being coerced out of illicit peer pressure. There's a psychological compulsion placed upon them to act as if religion is true. Now, this is oftentimes referred to as a dignitary harm. If you look back at old legal theory, a harm was something fairly obvious. A harm happened when your property was destroyed. A harm happened when you had a financial loss. A harm occurred when there was physical bodily harm to you or perhaps to your reputation. Dignitary harms are quite different things. Dignitary harms occur when an individual believes him or herself to have been slighted in some fashion, even if they're unable to point to a loss of property or a loss of reputation or physical harm or some sort of financial impediment. Now, if prayer poses a grave risk of psychological coercion and dignitary harm to American citizens, think about religion being on the back foot. Think about every time that the church makes an argument. We made it just yesterday. The Vatican released a statement about surrogacy and abortion and the death penalty and war, yes? If every time the church makes a claim about the truth or falsity of an action or proposes a reason in public, if that's viewed as psychological coercion or psychological compulsion, what wouldn't be potentially viewed as psychological compulsion? Justice Scalia, in his dissent to this case, said, The Supreme Court justices need to read more law and less Freud. It's a pretty good response. In another case, he calls this psychological argle-bargle. I don't know what that means, but it's a good claim. Argle-bargle. This is not real law. This is argle-bargle. All right, that's 1992. Now, it gets even more complicated, though, because the court begins to claw back, in some sense, the capacity of religion to be present in public. Another landmark case from 2001 is the Good News Club. You had a local public school, which was a limited public forum. A limited public forum means the school after hours is not open to just anyone. You have to apply to come to the school. The school can give permission to the 4-H club or the Rotary Club, or in this case, the Good News Club, to use the school. Now, here's the heart of the debate. Imagine the following two scenarios. Club number one meets at the school. It's after hours, it's 3:30 p.m. Students are free to leave or free to come to the club. Club number one makes the following claims. You should be a good citizen. You should vote. You should pay your taxes, and you should cut your grass. Those four things. Would that be acceptable for the club to do at a public school? Yeah, of course. Now imagine club number two, called the Good News Club, comes and says, you should be a good citizen. I can't remember what my four things were. You should pay your taxes. There was another one, you should vote, whatever it was, and you should cut your grass because God has asked you to. Same claims, yes? Now, the first is obviously constitutional. You have a local civic group encouraging citizenship, but note they're encouraging citizenship for entirely secular reasons. Group number two is making the very same claims. They're encouraging good citizenship, but appealing to religious motivations or religious reasons for that citizenship. Is that in violation of the Establishment Clause because it's at a public school? I'd be interested to think how you thought the court comes down. Maybe you know the case. How many of you think the court allowed the Good News Club to give its religiously motivated defense of citizenship? How many of you think the court did not side with the Good News Club? The court sided, in fact, with the Good News Club. And one of the things that's remarkable, and Justice Thomas articulated this very strongly, what is the difference between group one saying, do X for a secular reason, and the second group saying, do X, the very same thing, for a religious reason? Now, here's what's interesting about it. Reasons are reasons. So if you and I are arguing about something, I can't imagine we do that. We seem all very moderate here. You know how that old joke about politics? Everyone to your left is a moron and everyone to your right's an idiot, but we've got it right. You all seem very reasonable people. I'm sure you agree with me. Now imagine we're arguing back and forth about politics and you appeal to the Book of Mormon. I'm not Mormon. Am I forced to accept your reason, or can I say I'm not persuaded by this? I can say I'm not persuaded by this. Have I coerced you? Have I compelled you? Has there been a psychological harm done to you? Has dignitary harm been done? No, because I've merely given you a reason which you are free to accept or not accept. Now note, the court is starting to ask the question, merely because something is religious, does that mean that it must be viewed as not rational, as only private, as only rooted in authority and coercion? And the court's answer pretty clearly in Good News seems to be no. The giving of a religious reason is the giving of a reason which all human beings in principle are open to understand, evaluate, and judge for themselves. And the fact that it has a religious motivation does not mean that it's per se irrational, let alone that it's a kind of coercion or compulsion. That's pretty interesting, and that's a big difference, isn't it? All of which gets us to 2022 and the famous Kennedy case. So, in Lee v. Weissman, graduation prayer is disallowed because it's a dignitary harm, because it's psychological coercion. Sometimes it's embarrassing to read the court. You know what the court means by psychological coercion? Peer pressure. Peer pressure. Prayer at graduation went away because it could be peer pressure. The Kennedy case, remember this case? It's the football coach. After the games, he prays at midfield. Membership of the team does not require that you join him. You might be a starter or not a starter, it doesn't matter. It's not a vocal prayer even, it's a silent prayer that he does to himself. This, of course, all the lower courts say he's not permitted to do because prayer at school is a dignitary harm because it coerces or compels the other members of the team. If you're QB2 and you want to be QB1, you have to go pray, yes? Which way did the court decide? He's allowed to pray. So after the court case, if I'm remembering these details correctly, after the court case, when he won, he went to the 50-yard line, silently as he always does. He doesn't even invite students. He just goes and prays. He knelt, he did a silent prayer, and then he tendered his resignation to the school board, which is a pretty bold move, isn't it? I've won, here's my resignation. The court sides with the football coach. Why? Because it is not a violation of the Establishment Clause for someone who even is a school employee, at the moment after the game has ended, where he is no longer exercising his office as a school employee, to engage in private prayer, even though it's in public, even though it's on school grounds, and even though students are around. Note how drastically that's shifted from the dignitary harm, psychological coercion, peer pressure argument from the earlier parts. That's a pretty big advance, isn't it? It's a pretty big advance. And note, the court is beginning to suggest that you can do actions which, in a sense, encourage religion. This is, of course, neutral between and amongst the religions. It doesn't matter whether Coach Kennedy is a Methodist or a Southern Baptist or a Roman Catholic or Jewish or Muslim, right? All religion has the same standing before the law. But note, the court was willing to encourage religious behavior as opposed to discouraging religious behavior, in the words of the court, because it's in keeping with the history and traditions and manners of the American people. Now, this leads to some interesting questions. I'm sure you're all aware of the metaphor of the wall of separation of church and state. People like to think of this as a constitutional principle. Of course, it's not. It's given in a private letter from Thomas Jefferson. The same Thomas Jefferson, who you probably know, took scissors and cut out all the parts of the New Testament that he didn't like because he thought they were weird or false or bizarre or not enlightened. Jefferson writes a private letter about the wall of separation, or the separation of church and state. It's not a constitutional principle. It's never been enacted in law. But I suspect if you grab, random 20 students at Princeton or Rutgers or TC&J and ask, is the separation of church and state in the Constitution? They'll say yes, and it's not. Where the court is now, there's another metaphor that people are trying to suggest. You can think of a wall to keep your neighbors out of your property. Here's church, here's state, the wall's up so they don't touch. We get the metaphor, yes? There's another metaphor though, which is, why is it that you might fence in your backyard? Is it to keep your neighbors out? Maybe. It's so that your garden can flourish. There's two ways to think about a wall. One is to keep the church away from the state. A second is to make a wall to protect religion, so that religion can in fact be free to flourish, and so that citizens, encouraged by the government to follow their conscience, can train their own children and the members of their community to keep their religious beliefs. And now what you have is a metaphor not of a castle to keep religion away from the state, but a wall to keep state out of religion, where religion can in fact flourish and be passed on. That's good news. That's good news. So those are good advances or good developments when it comes to establishment. Very quickly, the American Legion case, the cross. This is the Blandenburg Cross not too long ago. There's a cross, it's at a World War I memorial. Money has been spent to fix it up. Violation of church and state, this is in 2019, by the way. Violation of church and state for public funds to be used to preserve a stone cross in a public cemetery commemorating World War I. Who thinks the court strikes it down, the cross has to go? Who thinks that they allow the cross to stay? They do. Why? Because the cross is old. Now we've got a mixed problem. The court says the cross is so old, it's been there since World War I, that it is no longer a religious symbol. It's a symbol of World War I. Could they have erected a new cross? No. Well, that's a mixed one, isn't it? The cross is allowed to be kept when it has no religious significance. If it had had religious significance, it probably would not have been maintained. Okay, that's establishment, free exercise. Free exercise. In the 1930s, there was a great worry about whether or not America was going to be able to continue its form of life. Great Depression, worries about capitalism in the market, whether it was unjust, and then rising worries about tyranny and totalitarian forms of government in Europe, communism, fascism, the Nazis, and so on. One thing that many American states and townships did was require a pledge and a salute to the flag. Okay? Seems to make some sense, doesn't it? If we're worried about the American story continuing, have a pledge or a salute to the flag. If you know, at the time it's the Roman salute, which was soon abandoned because the Roman salute is the same salute that the Nazis used, so that had to be replaced pretty quickly, of course. But you saluted the flag and you had to recite the pledge. Jehovah's Witnesses, which have always been a relatively small group in the United States, practice a pretty strict adherence to Hebrew law in some parts, and they believe that saluting the flag is a violation of the commandment to not worship graven images. So to this day, Jehovah's Witnesses will not salute the flag, or they will not put their hand over their heart and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. They will not pledge allegiance to the flag, okay? In a famous case, they lost. So they argued that it was a violation of their free exercise, and all they wanted to do, this in the late 30s, all they wanted to do was to have an exemption. They merely wanted to leave the room during the pledge. And there's two of them. This is a very small religious group, okay? They lose. The court says they have to do the pledge. And their request to have an exemption from the pledge based on the free exercise clause gets no traction with the court. Just a few years later, and this is a big deal, the court doesn't like to overturn itself in 2 or 3 years because it makes them look ridiculous. They like to overturn themselves 49 years later, and then it seems more responsible. 3 or 4 years later, the court overturns itself. But here's what's interesting. In the first case, the Jehovah's Witnesses defended themselves in their refusal to engage in the pledge based on free exercise, and they lost. In the second case, they made no claim of the free exercise of religion at all, and only claimed that they were defending themselves based on free speech, and they didn't wish to have compelled speech, and they won. Now that's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? The First Amendment includes both the rights of free exercise and the freedom of speech. Free exercise did not protect them, free speech did. Now, which is more important, free speech or freedom of religion? Well, the court has said it's free speech. Yeah, but they're wrong. The court can be wrong, it turns out. Well, they are related in some fashions, aren't they? Free exercise of religion seems to relate to freedom of conscience, the freedom to think as you believe, to speak as you believe, the freedom to act within certain limits as you believe. They seem related. But notice, the court was willing to defend free speech, but not the free exercise of religion. Now, one of the things that emerges from that is what's called strict scrutiny. Strict scrutiny makes the following claim. When there's a law which is going to in some way limit free exercise of religion, the burden is placed on the government to justify its action. When the government merely wishes to have some zoning restriction or zoning law, all they need to do is demonstrate that they have a rational basis for their actions. They have a reason to do it, it's their prerogative to do, it's going to be upheld as constitutional. That's a very low barrier, and the burden of proof would be on you, the private citizen, to demonstrate that the government is not allowed to do that. If, however, the government limits your free exercise of religion, the burden of proof is now on the government. They have to demonstrate two things. First, that there is a compelling state interest to do this. A compelling state interest is the highest level that there is in governmental action. It's the sort of thing like, if we don't do this, there's going to be the death of citizens, or violence, or the end of the nation. That's a pretty high level, yes? I don't know what your own political views are, but I doubt that every action that a government does is a compelling state interest. There's a whole lot of things that they don't need to do, but there's a rational basis for it. It makes sense, they're within their rights. Second though, even if it meets the threshold of a compelling state interest, which is pretty tough, the government then also needs to demonstrate that the law is narrowly tailored. Narrow tailoring means something like the following. What the government proposes to do is necessary to attain this compelling state interest, And only this action can bring about the compelling state interest. You may remember the debates between the Little Sisters of the Poor and President Obama about this, and whether the Little Sisters of the Poor were in fact required to provide contraception. Eventually, the Little Sisters of the Poor won. Why? Because the law was not narrowly tailored. There were other ways to have access to contraception for their employees than for the sisters themselves to provide it. So the law was not narrowly tailored. The law was not required in order to bring about access, we can debate that too, but access to healthcare, access to contraception, so the Little Sisters won. Okay, that's strict scrutiny. Now, if strict scrutiny is met, the government is entitled to act. But even if the government is entitled to act, we have a long tradition of granting exemptions. How is it going to hurt if we allowed 3 Jehovah's Witnesses in a community to not recite the pledge? This is not 3 million people. This is not 30 million people. The Jehovah's Witnesses are no less law-abiding than anyone else, and in fact, it turns out they're quite a bit more law-abiding than most people's. All they were asking for was an exemption to not recite the pledge. And their question is, what's the harm? Now that logic begins to win the day. Even if the government has a compelling state interest and a narrow tailored law to bring about this compelling state interest, if I, for religious reasons, am able to ask for a religious exemption and show to the government that their ability to accomplish the compelling state interest is still possible, then the law is not narrowly tailored because they don't need me to do it to bring about these goods. Okay, that becomes the law of the land for a long time, until an infamous case of the Employment Division v. Smith. It's a case out of Oregon. 2 members of an Indian religion, Native American religion, believe that they should use peyote as part of for sacramental purposes. They're not using peyote to get high. They're not using peyote for recreational purposes. They're not using peyote at noon on a Tuesday. They're using peyote within the strict limits of religious services with clergy and others involved. Peyote, however, though, at the time was a controlled substance, still is in most places. So it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the following argument is made. Fine. We understand that peyote is actually fairly dangerous, and there's a compelling state interest for the state not allowing people to use peyote on a recreational basis. 2, we understand that the law is general and neutral. It's not directed against this church. The law does not exist to target these people, and it's applicable to everyone. Here's what I mean. Think of an analogy. Imagine if during Prohibition, Prohibition had come into existence in order to get rid of sacramental wine. Okay, would that be neutral or would it be targeted? It'd be targeted, okay? That's what I mean. Were the peyote laws targeted at this Native American religious group? No, they were for everybody. No one was allowed to use peyote. The law did not come into existence to get rid of this religious group. Now, you might think that there would be a natural way to grant an exemption to this very small number of people using peyote for what they understood to be sacramental reasons, only within the limits of a religious service and under the control and oversight of their clergy. And what does the court say? No. The court, in fact, guts out about 40 years of jurisprudence allowing exemptions on the basis, written by a Roman Catholic justice, now you're wondering which, Scalia, that if we allow religious exemptions to what is otherwise a general and neutral law applicable to everyone and not targeted at religion, every person who has a religious belief becomes a law unto themselves. Any law I could claim an exemption to, in theory, as violating some aspect of my conscience, yes? So Scalia and the majority argue that there should not be religious exemptions at all to laws which are general, apply to everyone, and neutral, not targeting religion. Now, who do you think responded pretty strongly against this? Everybody. The Democrats hated this, the Republicans hated this, President Clinton hated this, and you had almost universal agreement from the Senate and from the House and the President, at the time, President Clinton, that this was a terrible idea. This is where all the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts began, right? The RFRA laws. So Congress passed a RFRA law which said, no, we're going back to the old law, which is strict scrutiny, compelling state interest, narrow tailoring. If you can grant an exemption and it doesn't destroy the government's ability to act, you have to grant the religious exemption. There's the problem though, that only applies to federal laws. It doesn't apply to state level laws. So after Smith, some states have RFRA laws, which became very important around the debates about same-sex marriage and whether or not you had to provide services or licenses for same-sex marriages. And other states do not have religious freedom restoration laws. So in other words, it's all over the place. You're more protected in some states than in others. Okay, so the court acts to get rid of religious exemptions. Congress acts to restore religious exemptions, but only on the national level. Okay, we have two big cases though, which are asked about exemptions. Both though are not decided on religious reasons, but on free speech reasons. You see the trend? Here's one thing that's interesting about Smith. Justice Scalia, writing for the majority, says, we have never, we here meaning the court, we have never granted exemptions merely on free exercise grounds alone. It has to have a hybrid test of free exercise coupled with another right, like free speech or free association or parental rights. Now, does that seem like the court's valuing religious freedom very much? If in order to defend religious freedom, we have to find another right to go along with it, like free speech? Do we do that with free speech? Do we say, oh, your free speech has been violated, but we'll only protect it if you find another right that's also been violated? Nope, how free speech is going up in importance and free exercise is going down. Okay, so here's the two big cases, neither of which are decided on religion, both of which are decided on free speech. Masterpiece and 303. These are both Colorado cases. So there's a baker who makes wedding cakes. He views his cakes as works of artistic creation. He doesn't make generic wedding cakes. I've been to a lot of weddings, not once have I ever been able to tell the difference between wedding cakes, except my own. My own wedding cake was beautiful, and I'm glad I put all the time into deciding which one. They all look the same, dear. Oh, we're recording that, aren't we? He views his cakes for weddings as works of artistic creation, as symbolic speech or expressive conduct. The court has long protected expressive conduct. It's in part why pornography and nude dancing is constitutionally protected, because it's expressive conduct. So, a couple, same-sex couple who hope to marry, have a license to marry in Colorado, Obergefell has passed, same-sex marriage is now permissible under the law of the land, comes to this baker and says, make us a cake please for our wedding. And the baker says, no, I will not make a cake for your wedding because I believe it to be against my religious views, because I believe that marriage is traditionally understood and in keeping with my biblical understanding is between a man and a woman. So I can't make you this cake. I will make you a cake for your birthdays. I will make you a cake for the baptisms of your children if you have them. I'll make you cookies for a party. I won't make a cake for a wedding. Now, Colorado goes after it. This guy has been hounded now for years and years and years. The Colorado Commission of Human Rights goes after him, and he loses. The case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court, and it's decided in what is an epic non-decision. This is somewhat disputed, but here's how I interpret it. We have testimony from the Colorado Human Rights Commission which says bad things about the religion of the baker. In other words, it is preferential about religion. It says, oh, religion oppresses people. His religion is false. His religion is really bad. And so the court says that he wins, not because he has religious freedom, but because religious neutrality has been violated by the state, all of which implies, of course, that the next time all they needed to do was not say bad things about his religion, yes? All they had to do was be silent, and the Human Rights Commission would win. And also that this is free expression, it's symbolic speech, and what do we not do in the United States? We don't compel speech. Note this is a lot like the flag saluting case again. It's not about religious freedom, but about free speech. Well, that doesn't seem very satisfying to a group of people, so a test case is brought up called 303 Creative. It's now about a web designer. And the web designer has not even started her business yet. It's a test case. And she says, I'd like to know, under Colorado law, if I refuse to make a website for a wedding, for a same-sex couple's wedding, am I going to be okay under Masterpiece, or am I going to be fined? Colorado Commission says you're going to be fined. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and she wins. She would not have to make a website for a same-sex couple celebrating their wedding, so long as she is not violating anti-discrimination laws by refusing to make the website because of their sexual identity. So she has to make them websites for birthday parties. She has to make them websites for a backyard party. She has to make them websites for everything except their wedding, because that would be compelled speech about something that she refuses to speak on. But note, it's not about religion. So is religion being defended? Accidentally. Accidentally. Is she granted a religious exemption? No, she's being defended based on speech. Well, are things good or bad? You tell me. No. There's a bunch of from my perspective, a bunch of positive developments there, including the fact that religion can be viewed by state agents as something to encourage, as opposed to just neutrality between religion and non-religion. That seems to me to be a positive development. Second, there seems to be positive developments in that religious people seem to be winning all the cases lately. The Kennedy School Prayer case, Masterpiece case, 303 Creative. But there seems to be some instability because they're winning the cases not based upon the free exercise of religion, but based upon free speech, which is good, but I'd like to win the cases based upon the free exercise of religion, not based on another right, which is not the one I'm perhaps claiming. Okay, that's free exercise and establishment. Good news and some unsteady news. Here's the social and cultural trends I think that we should be deeply concerned and worried about. And it's this. First, it's great that the Supreme Court might be on the side of religion just at the moment, but Supreme Court justices, although they seem to have unusually long lifespans, are not in fact on the court forever. And elections have consequences, and there can be new justices. And the dissents against these religious freedom cases have been incredibly intense. These have not been, most of them, unanimous decisions. These have been close decisions, and close decisions need 1 or 2 votes to go the other way. It's also the case that while the Supreme Court decisions could change in the future, so there's some instability there, the court generally in its decisions is giving instruction and guidance to the lower courts, Court of Appeals, and then from there down to state agencies and so on. And many of the state agencies continue to resist the decisions of the court and to fairly aggressively attempt to limit free exercise and to limit public expressions of religion. And even though they keep, in a sense, losing at the Supreme Court, there's a lot of years between the first time you're brought up in human rights charges and fined to finally winning in the court, as the lower courts and the lower state agencies continue to, in a sense, disregard the decisions of the Supreme Court. That's very worrisome. Here's some more things to worry about. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his book, already in 1830, Democracy in America, says that Americans have basically 2 motivations. You can agree or disagree. I think this is interesting. Americans, he says, unlike France, where he's from, are incredibly religious. They have a spirit of religion, and they're serious about their religion, and they're intense about their religion in a way that the old countries are not. 2, he says, Americans are also deeply concerned for a spirit of liberty in a way that the old countries are not. So they want to be free, but they also want to be moral. They want to be free, and they also want to be religious. Okay, we can have a tension between, in theory, freedom and religion, yes? De Tocqueville suggests that one of those spirits will win and defeat the other. Which do you suppose he thinks will win and defeat the other? Religion, meaning things like community and order and law and tradition, or liberty, meaning license and doing as you wish. Which is going to win? Liberty's going to, the spirit of liberty is going to win, religion will lose. Is he correct? Well, I leave that for you to decide. It seems to me that there is something deeply within the American project which calls into question religion if religion is perceived to come at the expense of individual liberty. Remember the Levy-Weissman case? If religion looks as if it even threatens the dignity of others, religion has to give way. Liberty's going to win. Here's another problem. Religion is increasingly viewed, so I work a lot with college students, including some pretty gifted ones. And despite how gifted they are, they have been trained since childhood. For them, this is self-evident. They've been trained to view religion as irrational. Religion is a matter of the heart. Religion is a matter of private belief. Religion isn't true or false. There's some fancy philosophical words for that, cognitivism versus non-cognitivism. But the way it works is you be you and I'll be me, because we are really indifferent about religion. Now, what does that train the young? Okay, so I have 5 children. Let's imagine I trained my children to think that religion is not very important. What will they believe? That religion is not very important. That it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. That you needn't think about it or consider it. That mom and dad and authorities and traditions don't know. That whether you believe or don't believe couldn't matter at all. Okay, now imagine people who are trained in that fashion. Religion isn't true or false. It's a sort of secret, private, weird thing that some people do, and it's kind of weird. Grandma does it, but not us. And that grandma does it makes it incredibly suspect. Grandma's got bad taste in music. Grandma has this taste in religion. She's got these beads. It's weird. I don't want to be, okay? You get the point. And now you come along as grandfather, grandmother, parent, state agent, public school teacher, parochial school teacher, CCD instructor. And you say, here's a truth claim that the Catholic Church not only believes, but knows to be true, and here are its reasons. How are the young trained to view those claims and those reasons? As opinions, as subjective, as not true or false, as not being reasonable. You know the poem Jabberwocky? Ever heard this poem? The vorpal blade went snicker snack, beware the jub bird, my son, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. It's a nonsense poem. I sometimes feel when I'm talking to the young, including some very sophisticated college students, that when I say, look, here's the new Vatican document about human dignity, and it's talking about the unalienable right of human beings created in the image of God to have dignity that cannot be taken away, I fear that what they're hearing is something like, shun the frumious bandersnatch. They don't take the claim seriously. I can't tell you how surprised and shocked I am of students. I was up at Columbia last week teaching it, and I was sort of joking about this with a student. He agreed. Columbia, pretty good school, yeah? These are pretty smart kids at Columbia. I made this joke and he agreed. I said, I've yet to meet a Columbia student who doesn't understand quantum physics. And he sort of laughed like, oh yeah, we all understand quantum physics at Columbia. They don't, but that's great. No one will admit that they don't. And I said, I've yet to meet a Columbia student who hasn't read every line of Shakespeare. He laughed, oh yeah, we've read every line of Shakespeare twice and we've understood it. And then I said, but I've met lots of Columbia students who are perfectly willing to say, oh, I don't know anything about religion. I've never read about it, I've never studied it, I've never experienced it. It's not interesting to me sociologically, it's not interesting to me philosophically, it's not interesting to me historically. Now, how can you not be interested in religion historically? It's a major cultural presence in the history of the United States, of Europe, of the world. It explains wars and battles and science and mathematics and universities and voyages of discovery. It explains a lot of bad stuff. It explains a lot of good stuff. It's just interesting. Even if you didn't believe a religion was true or that there was a God, it's interesting. Let alone the question, which seems to me that every human being is naturally ordered to ask, which is something like, where did I come from? Where am I going? What is happiness? And in what can I hope? And what have they been trained to not ask? Where did I come from? Where am I going? What's happiness? And what can I hope? Now here you come along, retrograde Catholic grandma with your beads and your stories, and you say, oh, I know where you came from. Here are my reasons. I know where you're going. Here are my reasons. I know what happiness is. Let me tell you. I know in what you can hope. Here's my account. You almost automatically seem oppressive because you are giving a truth claim. And the reasons that you're providing are not viewed as bad reasons. They're not viewed as incomplete reasons. They're viewed as exercises of force. And what do we do with exercises of force that we believe to be illegitimate or untoward or unjust? We resist them. Now you see the claim that I'm making? The social and cultural forces of our society. I like to call this the cultural catechesis. Your children and grandchildren have received a relentless cultural catechesis from Facebook and the movies and entertainment and the schools and the newspapers and society, and it's relentless. It's 24/7, teaching them that the point of life is their own self-understanding and self-determination, teaching them that religion is so irrelevant that you don't even need to think it false. It's just gone somewhere else. Now, you come, as we all do, and we provide catechesis when they are 12 to 13 for 8 Sundays. We're going to lose that one. We're going to lose that one. And it's not just that the religious faith of our young is somewhat threatened, and we can see the stats on this. Yeah, there's lots of good news too, but there's some bad news about religious adherence among the young, namely, it's down. But it's not just that they don't practice Catholicism anymore. It's that when they hear about Catholicism, they either hear the vorpal blade go snicker snack, it's just nonsense, or worse, it's intrinsically and inevitably oppressive, repressive, and irrational. That's not a good situation for religious freedom when significant numbers of our fellow citizens believe that our form of life is repressive and oppressive. We can win all the Supreme Court cases we want, but if we're unable to convince our fellow citizens that we only propose, we never impose, and that we are very serious in the teachings of Vatican II, that people are duty-bound in their conscience to pursue the truth of God and then to live in keeping with that truth, and that they are also duty-bound to form their consciences, to take these questions seriously, we're going to be viewed as not good fellow citizens. We're going to be viewed as bad citizens, bad neighbors, and the court cases and the challenges and the tests from Colorado against bakers and school districts against teachers and Colorado against website developers will be relentless. That's the troubling news. Do we have time for some questions, Kathy?
Yeah, we have plenty, yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
That's what I have to say. You probably have better things to say than I do. So questions, please.
So what is the, either the federal or the state level courts saying, why is the Muslim faith allowed to go ahead and have foot baths and it has to be paid for with public dollars to have in here? And I'm sorry, I'm walking out of class right now because I have to go ahead and go on a prayer mat. But if a kid walks around with rosary beads, it's like, no, you can't do that.
You know, Americans are very sensitive to questions of majority and minority, and for some good reasons. So if we have a democratic republic, right? We don't have a democracy, and we don't just have a republic. We have a democratic republic or a constitutional republic. The reason we have a constitutional republic is that we have some democratic aspects of our form of government. Think the House of Representatives, yes. And we have some non-democratic aspects of our government as well. The Senate is not proportional, right? Nevada gets as many senators as New Jersey, right? And we do that so that we separate powers and that we don't concentrate powers. So it's been our form of government to attempt to have both majority rule, but very strong defenses for minorities. That's our form of government. We're pretty serious about it. It's probably why we have a Bill of Rights. Not everything is open to debate. We don't care if everyone votes towards this. It violates the Second Amendment or the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment, so you can't do it. So where people were very sensitive to minority rights, and I think for good reasons, if you look at the American story, it's clear that the vast majority of Americans in the experience have been Christian of one form or the other. Anglicans in South Carolina, Congregationalists and Puritans in New England, Baptists in Rhode Island, Catholics in Jersey after the waves of immigration and so on. So we have a society which is pretty deeply formed by the Christian tradition or history or story, how Christian it is or how serious it is. But it's a Christian country in the sense of historical influence. Okay. Well, you have new patterns of immigration, right, including significant immigration from predominantly Muslim countries. But we're still a people who are concerned and sensitive to minority rights. You can see the kind of logic that minorities should be protected in a way that majorities don't need to be protected because they're the majority, they have all the protections they need. So if you begin to think about the question of why might Muslims get some prerogatives that the Catholic kid doesn't get at the local public school, you might think that's unfair, you might think that's unjust, fair enough with me. The reason behind that, though, is our cultural story that the majorities are already protected because they're the majorities, and the minorities are not protected sufficiently because they're minorities, and then add into that the Levy-Weissman reasoning that peer pressure is a kind of harm. That if you are the minority religiously, there's already a threat to you just because you're the religious minority. Now, do I think that's good analysis? Not so much. Do I think that's what's going on and that there's actually some good motivations behind that? I actually do. It does demonstrate a concern to protect minorities from majority rule and majority overstretch, but it also results in a kind of unfairness between religious groups.
I want to add on to that. I don't know if anyone remembers that after 9/11, there was a town in California where the Muslim community, I believe it was, said, no, we want that flag off of that fire truck. Do you remember that one?
I don't remember that.
And the town said, okay, yeah, because it's offensive to them. But we just had our country attacked.
We're also, as a people, very sensitive currently towards giving offense. You know, I became an American citizen, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. So I grew up in Canada. I've been living in the country since 1993, and I told my wife I was not going to become a citizen until Queen Elizabeth II died, and then she just lived forever. Like she like the Energizer, but she just kept going and going. So I've been in the country since, what, 30 years, and she finally passed away, and I became a citizen. There's something very noble about the American spirit. I was very proud to become an American citizen. I've been deeply informed by the American story. I've loved America since I was a kid. Like in Western Canada in 4th grade, I wrote a letter to Ronald Reagan, like, I'd seen Top Gun, you're the greatest man ever. I don't know if those dates quite match up, but something like that. I love the United States. The people of the United States, it seems to be, are unusually decent in their hesitancy to needlessly offend and cause harm to other people. Let me rephrase. Other than New Jersey, most Americans, I've lived in New Jersey for 7 years now, and I'm like, why can't we be more like Raleigh? There's no reason to yell. Americans are actually pretty decent, sensitive, sympathetic people. They don't wish to unnecessarily cause harm or offense. They like the sense of human dignity. We value that a lot. We have a hint of an honor culture or the remnant of an honor culture in our society. I can compare that to Canada, where there's very little of an honor culture in Canada, right? You always give way, you wouldn't stand your ground, that sort of thing. Well, people who are sensitive to giving offense can be overly sensitive to giving offense. They can be people who, rather than insisting that something is true, and insisting I just mean sort of articulating the thing, are silent. Or people who might insist that, well, there's actually nothing offensive about the flag of the United States, are willing to take it down. Now, is there something noble about that? It seems to me there is. That's actually part of the American genius and part of the American decency. Is there something misguided at times about that? It seems to me it is as well. Truth is worth articulating. Please.
I have two related questions, and I'm afraid to ask him because I might not have all the facts correctly, but undoubtedly you do, so you'll correct me.
We'll be wrong together and pretend we're right.
A couple years ago, there was a family in Philadelphia who went to the Planned Parenthood building the father went there with his children.
Yes.
And all he did was stand up, and I don't know whether he vocalized the prayer or was it a silent prayer, but he was kicked out of that area, and he was arrested. Now, I'll give you the other example. It's very similar. There's a lady who did the same thing. She didn't pray. I mean, she didn't vocalize her prayer. She just stayed there, silent prayer. How do those two relate to this, what the Supreme Court has been saying about the prayer?
Yeah, thank you for that. So it is interesting. Abortion, when conflicts between abortion access and rights and things like freedom of movement and freedom of assembly, abortion seems to often win those debates. So in the United Kingdom right now, there's a few really quite frightening stories where if you're in the vicinity of an abortion clinic, you may not pray. So there's a woman standing outside the abortion clinic, not praying vocally. She has no rosary beads, she has no sign, she's not blocking access to the abortion clinic. She's literally standing on the street corner. And a British Bobby, you remember your images of British Bobbies, lovely, nice guys, not true, came up and said, "Are you praying?" And she said, "Yes." And she's arrested on the spot. We're praying. We're praying. Now, we're not there. We're certainly not there. But the government has rather aggressively used, this was a very big deal in the 90s, the government aggressively used RICO, the racketeering laws, which are designed to control the mob and conspiracies among the mob to control abortion access. To control access to or near abortion clinics. We also have in the country generally understood to be a right of assembly. So you're allowed to, under normal circumstances, assemble on a public thoroughway, on a sidewalk. There are limitations. They're called time, place, and manner limitations. I can't gather on the sidewalk outside of your house at 2 a.m. with a bullhorn. That's a time location. But I can do it at 2 p.m. There's a place. I can't protest just anywhere I want. Sometimes I need to go to get a permit to go to a park or what have you for public order and public safety. That's a place restriction. But there's not to be any content restriction from the state. As a United States citizen, I'm in fact entitled to, in a public space, under normal time, place, and manner restrictions, think and say anything that I want, so long as it's not an incitement to imminent lawless action. Or it's not slander, right? The free speech is pretty big, but not when it comes to abortion. Now, the argument that's generally given there is, again, about dignitary harm. We can see why we can have some sympathy to this. So, I'm unequivocally pro-life, but it certainly seems to me that there's many instances where a young woman going to an abortion clinic is under emotional distress. She's not engaging in this decision. I'm unwilling to think that every time a woman receives an abortion, she hasn't given it any thought, or there's no tragedy, or there's no sadness, that she's just cavalierly indifferent to this. I can imagine it to be a tragic, difficult, horrendous situation, yes? She's going into an abortion clinic, and as she's attempting to access the abortion clinic, she is, her right of access is interfered with in some fashion. Someone wishes to speak with her or give her literature, okay? Now you can see how that could be interpreted as a dignitary harm, yes? If you were going into your own physician for some sort of like embarrassing rash, and someone came and said to you, I'd like to talk about rash awareness. You might say, hey, how about not now? There's something that is in fact about the integrity and privacy of medical decisions. There is a logic to that. It's not entirely illogical. At the same time though, abortion is a matter of public concern. Many of us believe that in many instances, it's an unjustified taking of a human life. Maybe not in every, there's health concerns and ectopic pregnancies and so on, but in many instances, it's an unwarranted, illegitimate taking of a human life, and it's a matter of public concern. And as ordinary citizens with rights, we have rights of assembly, rights of speech, rights of peaceful protest, and so on. Note the clash. There's a genuine clash of rights claims there. Group one, I claim a right. Group two, I claim a right, and there's tension between them. They push back and forth a little bit, yes? We tend to have sided with abortion rights in the country. There is at least a perceived tension between rights. and we've sided with abortion.
Yeah, following up on your question or your explanation of rights, I'm just thinking, like, we're always kind of taught about America was founded as a Judeo-Christian nation, and I know the founding fathers, believed in God. It's in the Declaration of Independence. So it's kind of, I still can't understand how it's so easy to just remove God from society. But I guess my question is, when you were talking about the first gentleman that asked you a question about the rights of the minority versus the majority, and we're compassionate people, we like to protect the minority. It seems like we flipped to the point where we protect the minority at the expense of the majority. And you brought up the case of the Jehovah's Witness where there was only 3 of them. So at what point, where you have 2% is minority and 98% is majority, can you justify some of the decisions?
If you read lots of really boring, complicated books in French and German from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, I think you get a bit of the story. So I'll just summarize all of those boring books for you. There was a fundamental change, I think, in Western countries starting in the 30s. The book to read here is William Reich's Sexual Revolution, 1930s already, Sexual Revolution. Reich made the claim that repression was the root of all violence and unhappiness. So if you wanted to solve unhappiness and violence, you had to get rid of any sexual repression. And sexual repression meant any limitations, restrictions, ordering of sexuality at all. Now, if you think that the limiting of sexuality is a source of unhappiness and violence and repression, what institution has to go? Got to get rid of the church, and you got to get rid of family. Got to get rid of both. And Reich's pretty explicit about it. In fact, Reich says, don't bother about the church, wait until we convince the young, and then we'll be able to get rid of the church. All right, flash forward to 1968. You remember the famous phrase of 1968? My French isn't good enough to say it out loud. It is forbidden to forbid. It's the famous expression both in the streets of Paris and the streets of San Francisco in 1968. It is forbidden to forbid. Now what's happening in those sorts of movements? So some of us belong, sort of intellectually at least, to an old world which might not exist anymore. And it's a world where we read people like Plato and Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine and Therese of Lisieux, and we think, hey, that seems like intellectual home. And when we hear words like true and good and beautiful, we think those sound like lovely concepts. I would like to believe things that are true and live a life that is good and enjoy things which are beautiful. Well, if something is true, here's the argument. If something is true, something else has to be viewed as false. If I view that mine is true, then what must I be saying about yours? Well, am I merely saying that your statement is false or that you are false? Well, I happen to think I'm merely saying your statement is false. If, on the other hand, we think that words like true, good, and beautiful are about power relations and forbidding and the powers of religion and the family to repress and control, which is really where this theory goes, then for me to claim that your belief is false, I mean, we've seen this in the last couple of years. Violence is not speech, but speech is violence. Remember this phrase from a few years ago? Violence is not speech, but speech is violence. If I say that what you're doing is false, I've done an act of aggression and violence against you. So what has to be called into question and weakened and sort of diminished? Truth. What about good? I say that my action is good and your action is thus, well, that's a dignitary harm to you. Because I've claimed not only that you've done something wrong, but that you are wrong. And what am I bringing to bear? Reason, philosophy, religion, the law, all of which are dignitary harms, coercion to make you do something. Same thing with the beautiful. I mean, you may remember the infamous Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision, which very oddly upheld Roe by striking down almost everything about Roe in order to maintain the central finding of Roe that abortion was lawful. But it undid everything about Roe. It got rid of the trimester system. It got rid of all the regulations that Roe had said were allowed or not allowed and what have you. And then we have this famous phrase from Justice Kennedy. I think one of the oddest phrases in legal history. What right do we have? What is an inalienable right of Americans according to Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which is what, a 92 or 93? The right to define the mystery of our existence. Well, what doesn't that include? The right to define the mystery of your existence in Planned Parenthood v. Casey included the right to abort a child. It soon became, remember this is Justice Kennedy, who also wrote Obergefell, became the right for same-sex marriage. Became the right to interpret sex under Title IX as including gender expressions, or transgender rights, because you have the right to define the mystery of your own existence. And if I say no to you, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm harming you. I'm violating your right to define the mystery of your own existence. That's license. And it means, from that view, any normative claim from something like religion and Catholicism seems to be viewed as especially bad here. Why? Because we really believe it. And we claim that the church is an expert in humanity. And the old slurs against Americans, against Catholics are coming back. We're bad citizens. Why are we bad citizens? Because our allegiance is across the ocean. Catholics are viewed with a special disdain under that story, because we think that we're children of God, and that the mystery of existence in some part is given to us by God's grace, God's goodness, and that we are redeemed by a Savior who tells us the point of our existence and the point of our life, who doesn't impose his salvation on us, but tells us it's true and welcomes us into it. On one reading of American Supreme Court history, you couldn't violate someone's self-interpretation, self-identification, and freedom more than you can by believing in religion. I don't think I exaggerate there. I don't think that's what most people believe, but I know a lot of people who believe that, and all the French and German theorists certainly do. It's a remarkable thing. Some years ago, a very decent, very noble German atheist, a philosopher, very good guy, had a series of dialogues with Ben Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI. And they both agreed at the end of the book, this man of deep faith, and this secular atheist, nonetheless just a decent human being, that the great danger which was undermining Europe, and I think by extension the United States, the great threat, was relativism, which called into question any reason to believe that other people had dignity at all. And what was left was power. Just power. Please, let's not end there. What did Snell say? Well, the Pope says it's all power. No. Let's have another question, please. Please.
You had said earlier about how a lot of the young people today are trained to think of religion as irrational. Is that training coming from their families, or is it coming from other sources, their school systems, the culture at large, and so forth? Who was, I guess, the primary purveyor of that mentality?
So I'm a father of 5. My oldest is 19. My youngest just turned 8. We attempt to be pretty serious about our religious observance and religious practice. We're good Catholics. We believe everything the Catholic Church teaches. We keep our obligations. We go to confession when we don't. We're trying to be good Catholics. Okay, so here you have my 5 kids. They grew up in a religious context, religious home. The grandparents are religious. They're not Catholic, but they take their religion seriously. Religious-friendly home. We send them to boys' clubs and girls' clubs. They do their catechesis. They do their catechism. They have a good priest. Okay, what's happening the rest of their lives? Everything else. Just everything else. And it's relentless. So what's the source? There's a lot of sources. Like to reduce causes to one source is probably a mistake. But one thing I would say for a lot of American young people is the following claim. It's a great book by Mary Eberstadt. Eberstadt makes the claim, the title of which is escaping me. She makes the counterintuitive claim, but then she finds the social science to back this up. Which do you think comes first? The loss of religion, so family decline, or family decline, so loss of religion? it seemed intuitive to me that the loss of religion resulted in family decline. And Eberstadt says, nope, it's exact opposite. Families have declined, and that's why religion has declined in the United States. Well, read some of the stats about how many young Americans, and this is across racial demographics, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, this is across class, like economic class. How many young Americans are raised without a father, biological father in the home? The numbers are staggering. Read the statistics about suicide among youth. The vast prevalence of suicide attempts by young Americans is by homes in which there's not a father. I mean, it's not even close. We're talking factors. And there's tragedies in life, and people are unwell, and trauma happens, right? Like there are many reasons why people have suicide ideation, and I condemn no one here. But when you see an enormous social prevalence of things like self-harm among families in which there's not a father, across racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, religion, something's up, right? Something's up. One of the strongest markers of whether children will maintain religion is whether dad practices religion. It's true, I think this is almost universally true, that people learn their faith and their prayers at mom's knee, right? Most dads are like, yeah, I'm trying here, but I don't know what to do and I feel weird, right? But you know what helps keep the kids in religion once they go to college? Whether dad practiced. What if dad's not around? The stats go on and on and on. We now have the lowest marriage rates ever in the nation's history. We have more single head of homes than we have married people filing tax returns. We have a non-sustainable birth rate. We're below replacement rates of birth. You need 2.1, we're at like 1.9. American women report that they don't have as many children as they wish. Huge prevalence of American women suggests that if they do have abortions, they're unwanted abortions, but they lack family structure, social structure, economic, right? But something's not right. We're not doing well as a people, and a lot of it, I think, has to do with weakness of the family. Is it just that? No. But when the family's weak, and you get a kind of relentless cultural catechism from media, entertainment, the schools, the kids are going to be unstable in their understanding of religion. That seem fair? I think it's right. Good? All right, thank you very much. Very good to be with you.
I just have to say, Dr. Snell, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing, and I am so sorry there aren't more here. Thank goodness that Dwight's videoing it, and it's going to be on the, I guess, on the website, right? That's where they put it, on the wherever.
Can I say one more thing, actually? That sounded kind of despairing and negative at the end. I'm a realist, by which I think, we need to look truth in the face. We need to acknowledge reality as it is, so that we can act intelligently and well. I sometimes like to joke with my family and friends, we got them just where we want them. So here's what we have on our side. We have the Holy Spirit. Here's what we have on our side. We have Our Lady. Here's what we have on our side. Millions of faithful Catholics and faithful Christians and serious Jews and well-intentioned Muslims. Millions of just decent, ordinary people doing their best with their lives. We have the truth of the Catholic Church, we have the truth of the magisterium, we have the unbroken tradition. We've been guaranteed by our Lord and Savior that the gates of hell will not prevail. We got Peter. They got some French theorists. We know how the story ends, and the story that we were promised was never that there wouldn't be crosses or sufferings. One of the reasons I became a Roman Catholic was because people I knew who were serious Catholics knew something about holiness. And what they knew about holiness that I did not know was that the cross was central to the Christian and Catholic experience, and that suffering could be redeemed and offered up to God, and that God still bore, Jesus still bore in his body. We're 8 days after Easter. And the story we remind ourselves on Divine Mercy Sunday is that he's got wounds in his body still. Isn't that the gospel we get on Divine Mercy? Still wounds in his body. This was not like magic, clappy, happy fairy tale where he like rises up and floats around, right? He rose again in a body. He still ate. He still had friends, and he was still wounded. And the wounds of our kids and the wounds of our youth and the wounds of the church, and they're significant, and things don't always look so great all the time. We have the risen Lord still wounded, who has never stopped working and who never will stop working, and who is God Almighty. We got him just where we want him.
In reference to what Dr. Snell had said about fathers, and I know we have more grandfathers here, well, fathers obviously, but then grandfathers. The program, the series that's coming up, My Father's Father, Ed listened to a number of those videos. It is amazing, but Father Dave talks about how essential it is that children be told by their fathers that they are proud of them, that they're pleased with them, that they love them. So if it's not happening with fathers, I wish fathers were here. And if you haven't signed up for the program, or if you can't sign up, you can watch it online. But it is just an amazing, amazing series, and just talks about the role parents, grandparents, fathers in the lives of children. Anyway, thank you. Go ahead, Ed.
Okay. And in reference to that, I mentioned that you could go online and sign up, but I wasn't aware there is actually a sign-up sheet in the back there. So again, it starts on Thursday, so you can still sign up for that. Reminder that there are all sorts of goodies over there to enjoy. Hopefully you'll hang out for a little while for some fellowship and friendship with your fellow Catholics and friends here. And don't forget that there are survey sheets in the back. I know that's always your favorite part of these, sitting down and filling those bad boys out. And in closing, because we start with prayer, we close with prayer. And the beautiful thing is that it's after hours, and this is not a public building, so I can pray as much as I want, which is great. So we will ask Our Lady's intercession for, there's so much going on in the world today. So much locally, nationally, internationally. And we know that anything that Our Lady asks of her son Christ, he does not refuse her. So that's why I always think it's a wonderful idea to go directly to her and ask her to just have a little chat with her son about what's going on in the world. So in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the evening and week.